Around the world, unpaid care work falls disproportionately on women, who perform 75% of all such work, 4 times more than men. The global phenomenon that renders unpaid care work invisible is rooted in centuries of policies, workplace norms, media, and educational curricula that have reinforced the norm that unpaid care work is mostly women's and girls' responsibilities, supported by traditional notions of gender roles and masculinities.
Well, I think unpaid care work reveals something. It brings to the surface certain aspects that are part of more than just a single household. It brings the structures of how labor is extracted, how we literally create surplus labor economies, how we create sort of potential labor which is right there waiting in the wings, ready to be sort of swallowed into more extractive industrial contexts. But we need them as this sort of, unpaid labor waiting in the wings, ready to step out the moment we need them, and then step back in, pushed back away into this invisible force, which is unpaid but still doing work. And we very conveniently call it care work.
Before we explore how countries can tackle the gender disparity of unpaid care work in South Asian households, let's recap why care equality is important. On a family level, care equality contributes to gender-equal attitudes among children, reduced intergenerational transmission of violence, and healthier, happier individuals. On a community level, it creates more equitable relationships, improved sexual and reproductive health outcomes, and enhanced early childhood development. On a systematic level, it leads to increased women in leadership roles, increased labor force participation by women, and a decline in men's violence and domestic violence.
This is a power relationship, right? When we talk about gender, when we talk about labor, paid labor and unpaid labor, in economics also it is power. Those who can bargain, claim and also get the payment out of their work, they earn it, and those who have these resources, earn resources, have power. But there are certain work which has to be performed every day. It is always demanded by the powerful people within the household. And when this cannot be performed, there is always a conflict within the family, right?
For generations, decision makers have been blind to the role that care plays in the functioning of society. The inclusion of unpaid care work as a target in the 2030 Development Agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals was a monumental decision, shedding light on women's economic empowerment and kickstarting much-needed conversation. The Generation Equality Forum has further recognized economic justice and rights as an action coalition to advance gender equality by 2026. However, many countries continue to exclude unpaid care work from their policy agendas. Now, for the first time in history, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have forced the world to confront the importance of care. The pandemic changed how we lived and cared for ourselves, families, and communities. And women have faced the brunt of the mental strain caused by the health crisis. In India, for example, around 49% of the job losses by November 2020 were those of women. And although many men regained employment, women faced a much tougher time. Globally, women who faced an increase in unpaid care work during the pandemic were less likely to return to paid work and more likely to lose access to social protection. But here's some encouraging news. Surveys in 47 countries confirm that as a result of lockdowns, men have been carrying out more hands-on care work than at any time in recent history. With these changes, it's important to recognize the involvement of men's roles in solving the unpaid care work burden more than ever.
Let me think of India for a moment. In what this second wave of the pandemic taught us, of the infections and the spread of infection taught us, that in the vis-a-vis of care for the elderly and for care for those with extreme morbidities who were the most vulnerable to the coronavirus and to infections, The things like shortages of oxygen, of medicine and hospital beds, the available or the provisioning of that really devolved upon men. So it was men of the household who were rushing around the city trying to fill empty oxygen cylinders, standing in long queues and for very long hours outside oxygen facility centers to try and get these cylinders filled, trying to badger different hospitals, rushing from hospital to hospital to secure a hospital bed. It's exactly men's outward orientation of care work that was the reason they were the ones who were doing this care work. But again, I think the pandemic has taught us not only the significance of this form of outward circuit of care work, this outward network of care, but the fact that yes, there are historical, cultural moments of time where men are in the forefront of doing care, and it is household-oriented care, but it is unpaid care.
Tying in with the comprehensive policy agenda developed by the UN is the 3R framework, which calls on countries to recognize, reduce, and redistribute unpaid care work in the economy.
Engagement of men in these activities needs to be recognized, important and valued as well. It should not be something that says, oh, this man has a wife who is domineering and therefore he has to cook and therefore he has to wash clothes. No, it should be something that men also recognize as something that they want to do because they want to ensure the well-being of the family.
The transformative masculinities approach to promoting equality between the genders focuses on how to address power inequalities related to gender and involves men in both the conversation and the solution. The barriers to men's participation in the household include restrictive gender norms, a lack of access to adequate paid leave and paternity leave, a lack of economic security for families, and a risk of ridicule from others when engaging in caregiving tasks. The proposed policies seek to tackle these barriers head-on. The first step involves recognizing the value of care work. Detailed time use data is required to make care work visible and frame better policies. Governments in charge can reduce the burden of unpaid care work by investing in physical infrastructure such as clean water, sanitation, electricity, and public services such as safe, accessible transport. With better systems in place, women spend less time engaging in low productivity tasks such as fetching water or other household tasks and are able to travel to places of employment safely.
My perception is, and needs to be further evidentially supported, that rural women are far more burdened with unpaid care work for which they are not remunerated because they are not only working for family and domestic unpaid care work, they are working outside domestic spheres in activities that are clearly economic but they are not recognized. The problem with the rural area is that majority of the rural women in the agriculture sector are working on the economic issue. They are working in the sector which is economically productive. For example, supporting their families in the agriculture. And all their help and all their support in cattle rearing, feeding, maintaining, or working on sowing or harvesting time, or even to support their men folks when they are working in the field by supplying food, and all that is a part of economic activity actually.
Investments in digital infrastructure to increase access to the internet is a growing factor that influences time spent on unpaid care work. Providing care for children and the elderly through formal systems will further support women's employment. Policies and campaigns for the redistribution of care work are arguably the most vital, demanding a state-level involvement in formalizing and regulating the care economy. Here's what that entails. In the workplace, providing equal, job-protected paid parental leave and flexible working arrangements. Longer periods of paternity leave and a greater parity between maternity and paternity leaves, since research shows that extended maternity leave may keep women outside the labor force for too long, causing their skills to depreciate. A change in workplace culture and policies to support workers' caregiving, whilst mandating those changes in national legislation. Adequate pay for workers in the paid care sector, helping recognize the importance of care. Closing in on the wage gap, the lack of equal pay for equal work has been found to discourage women from engaging in paid work. On a social policy level, working with the media to promote a cultural shift towards valuing care along with portraying caring, non-violent depictions of men and boys. Community engagement and public campaigns to encourage active involvement of fathers and male caregivers. Promoting equal participation in care work through positive narratives of male caregiving roles in the media, schools, and other institutions. On a state level, the role of the state is even deeper, involving gender-sensitive budgeting, greater attention to tax policy, and on-ground work with care workers to truly understand their barriers.
So let's see how we can redistribute. Let's see how we can reduce. And into this, government policy becomes very important, public policy, in terms of enabling or providing access to services, whether it's childcare, whether it's safe transport services, whether it is allowing parental leave, where men also, in the formal sector of course, men also are entitled to encouraged to take leave to be involved in the care of family members.
So what's required? Investments in and expansion of services that provide care for children and childhood education, potentially generating jobs as well. Public services and social protection policies that support families and enable the redistribution of care work within the household. Transforming health sector institutions to promote fathers' involvement from the prenatal period through birth and childhood, and men's involvement as caregivers. Developing better health and legal protocols for responding to cases of domestic violence using a victim-centered approach. While gender imbalances in unpaid work have declined in recent decades, they remain significant. This is a topic that can no longer go unaddressed. As countries embrace gender equality and the engines of liberation come into play, we must go beyond the stage of awareness and actively campaign for a world where equality exists both in the workplace and at home.